Hi everyone, Charles Hoskinson here. I just wanted to go and make a video before Christmas about a few things related to Shelley and new features we anticipate seeing during Q1, things that are priorities, things that are going to be changing for the new year. And anyway, I figured why not. 1.4 is out. People have downloaded 1.4. It's been quite a bit to get through. Just a few things about 1.4, things that I think are important to mention. 1.4 requires people to restore into the data layer of the system. It also takes the current way that we were storing files, where every block had its own file, which was kind of a bad design, and it compresses that down to basically an epic package. Now, these two processes are very I/O intensive. So you don't have to re-download the blockchain. If you're not connected to the internet, still it's going to work. The reality is, however, that while you're restoring into the new data layer and while you're cleaning up your hard drive, you're cleaning up the storage, going from these many blocks and many different files down to a new data layer. If you have a mechanical hard drive, a non-SSD, or if you have an older system, because this is such an I/O intensive process, generally it takes quite a bit of time. So for some people, we've seen restoration rates in the hours to in some cases days, but most users are able to do this in between 30 minutes to 2 hours. Some things that could be slowing down your restoration time could be your antivirus software. Antivirus softwares are heuristic engines. And basically what happens is if they see something all of a sudden taking a huge amount of I/O, or if they see lots of files moving around, they say, oh, this is suspicious behavior, and they tend to analyze that pattern against known signatures or bad patterns. Now, even if it clears and the AV is okay with this, the very act of analysis could quadruple, or in some cases even by a factor of 10, slow down your time it takes to install 1.4. So if you're having those issues, one thing you can do to try to speed it up is to disable temporarily your antivirus during the installation process and restoration process, and then re-enable it after the process is over. Another thing is that you won't instantaneously see reduction in storage size as soon as the installation is complete. There's a background process that runs once the restoration is done, which gradually cleans up the old files. And over time, usually a day, basically it'll purge all those old files, and then you'll just have the new database and the new data layer. And for many cases, you should be looking at probably a factor of 10 reduction of the amount of storage on disk. It depends on the file system you're using, if you're Linux, Mac, or Windows, and a litany of other little features. But it's a considerable improvement, and people post-upgrade should really notice a big improvement there. If you're having issues, submit a forum request, send us a bug request, and we're going to probably set up a dedicated channel on Telegram for people who are just having issues and they can't get it done for whatever reason, to talk with our people and get people through this very large upgrade. But it's slow, unfortunately, because it's a big update and you're basically moving from the old broken, not so good data layer to the new awesome, wonderful, great data layer. But in the process of that transition, it does take a bit of time. And so be patient and understand that this is not an event that's going to happen every time we do an update. This was the big one, and we spent quite a bit of time building this software, and we're quite happy with it. It just takes time to migrate to it. Okay, moving into Q1, let's talk about new features coming to Cardano, and let's talk about the Shelley Release. So basically, what is the Shelley Release? Well, there are 3 dimensions to the Shelley Release. There is a testing dimension, there is a deployment dimension, and then there's a social dimension. So in the testing dimension, we have a family of new protocols we've constructed. New network protocol, Horus Genesis, the delegation scheme, and the incentive schemes that we've come up with, as alongside this concept of stake pools and all the logic behind them. So basically, because we have all these new protocols, those protocols have to be fully implemented, and they do have to have some burn-in time to verify that the protocols are correct. Now, we've written prototypes now of our network stack, prototypes now of Ouroboros, BFT, Prouse, and Genesis, and we've written prototypes of some of the delegation mechanics as well as the incentive scheme. So we have a really good concept of what the new ledger rules need to look like, what delegation looks like. In fact, we have 50 plus pages of specifications for that, and those are growing, and a really good concept of what Genesis looks like. So the first half of Q1 is about getting ourselves to a point where we can begin broad-scale testing and verification that our ideas match reality. And we have, because of the process we follow, we're feeling pretty confident that they do. But that's a process. It's something to get done. The good news is that the code quality is really high, the engineers are really good, and everybody's roughly on the same page about what we need to do. The other good news is we've de-risked it a little bit by having two competing teams trying to do the same thing, using different tools, techniques, and processes. One is following a more pragmatic Silicon Valley standard, that's the Rust team, where they're moving very quickly, and then the other is following more disciplined, specification-driven development. It's a larger team, but they're moving at a slightly slower pace. And so both teams are working towards getting these protocols implemented and tested. Now, a large component of that is that thing I mentioned, the socialization of it. So once we're ready for a testnet, then we have to start building a large population of stake pools. Out of curiosity, last year we ran a registration list just to see how many people would be interested in running a stake pool, because we had to set kind of the parameter of what we felt would be a good target, 100, 200, 500, and so forth. We received, I think, over 4,000 people who are interested in running stake pools, and I think we'll probably get equivalent numbers once we open that again. So sometime in January, our comms department, in coordination with the newly reinvigorated Cardano Foundation, will reopen that registration, and we're going to try to get as many people as possible interested in potentially running a stake pool, and then very short order, we're going to roll them over into a testnet and try to get as close to that number of 1,000 as we can and get some two-way feedback on the use of the protocol. And then there's the actual rollover of what we have today, the Byron system, to where we would like to go, Shelley. Now, this means that we're going to have to issue a series of updates to the Cardano client. At least 2 updates will be required. One is that the current implementation of Ouroboros, this Ouroboros Classic, is very old implementation. It's based on the ideas we had back in 2017, but we've evolved quite a bit in our design of protocols. So what Ouroboros Genesis looks like versus what we have in our repo, very different things. So there's going to have to be at least one fork to get us to Genesis. And so what we've decided to do is use a halfway house solution where we implement Ouroboros BFT, we bring that in at the base level, and we fork to that, and then we have a migration path from BFT to Genesis. So BFT, the legacy team's been working on that, and it's the last piece of code we're going to be committing to the legacy repo. The implementation of BFT is done, and we've begun broad-scale testing of it. And we're going to actually test it both on the Rust side as well as the Haskell side. And we're going to run Rust clients against the Haskell clients. It's really exciting that we have 2 independent implementations, and these implementations are running against each other, verifying that we've correctly implemented from the specification that was written. So once BFT is out, that will be 1.5. The very next thing to do is to then begin a series of upgrades to get us to basically to Shelley. So there's going to be some changes to the ledger rules. There's going to be some changes to the APIs, and there's going to be some changes to the network stack. And all of these things are required for us for basically Shelley logic. And you'll see that post 1.5 coming through. We've made considerable improvements to our release process. We've made considerable improvements to our QA process. And we're now starting to work with code bases that have very little technical debt and are based upon good design principles and good engineering practices. One of the reasons why we had so much trouble throughout 2018 actually getting good products out is that we were dealing with a code base that did not have good documentation. We were dealing with a code base that was laden with a lot of technical debt, and we were dealing with a code base where the original engineers who wrote that were no longer at IOHK, and they left. So we were basically taking a halfway house of a halfway house that was not well understood, and we were trying to clean it up and make it reasonable. And if you look at the progression of updates, 1.1, 1.2, 1.3, and 1.4, we mostly accomplished that this year to the extent that we completely rewrote the entire wallet logic. We also heavily refactored the core so that we could actually write tests against the core, and we wrote retroactively a specification for the core, which is now finding its way into our new ledger rule specification. So we actually had to write two formal specs, one for the old system and one for the upcoming new system. The old system basically is required because we still need to validate legacy transactions as we move to Shelley. So that's all been done, but it was a heck of a lot of work. The good news is the new system doesn't have any of these legacy concerns. We designed it, we wrote it, and it's based on good principles. So it's much simpler and it's much easier to test. It's much easier to understand. It's much easier to keep in our head. Furthermore, we now have a lingua franca for our about basically design. We say, here's the set theory, here's the math. You can read a spec. It has some verbosity to it. There's some words associated with the math. And this is what Shelley is. So the core of the system is an implementation agnostic collection of mathematical representations. And any developer should be able to take that, read it, understand it, and say, ah, I understand what you're talking about when you say this is a valid transaction versus not. I can reason with the spec to understand one versus the other. From the UTXO set to the ledger rules to how consensus will work to how the network will work, that is the soul of our protocol. Now that we have that, we're moving along quite well. So basically, you're going to see 1.5 be Ouroboros BFT. You'll give everybody a heads up about that, and we'll have a much more graceful upgrade path. It won't require restoration. It won't require a new data layer. It won't require you to do much. It should be like a normal upgrade, so it won't be as painful as 1.4 is, but that'll get done. And then after that, we'll have a decoupled wallet backend. We'll have Icarus-style addresses, and then we're just going to gradually move our way to the V2 API and gradually move our way to all of the things that are required for Shelley. And then there'll likely be one more major update, and then it'll put in all the infrastructure, and then Shelley will just slide in. Now, some threshold conditions for Shelley are, it's not just good enough to have all the code written, and it's not just good enough to have all of the protocols ready to go and fully tested. It is a social component as well. We do need a certain critical threshold of people who are actually deploying stake pools, running stake pools, and understand what that means. So that'll be done in a very visible, transparent way. And what will likely happen is that we'll have a gradual winnowing of federated control to decentralized control, where epoch by epoch, basically more and more of the slots are made by stake pools, and less of the slots are made by the Ouroboros BFT. And then eventually that just disintegrates, and 100% of the slots are made by stake pools following the protocol. So it's as if the epochs are getting larger for decentralization. So you'll see a series of videos and blog posts and announcements, and Duncan will go and talk about this, as will others. But progress is pretty good. Now, in terms of the feature set, now that we have a decoupled wallet backend coming January, what's really exciting is we can start augmenting and really taking that wallet layer to the next level. So if you look at the Rust client, one of the cool things you can do with the Rust client is that you can manually construct transactions. Eventually, you can sign offline transactions, manual UTXO selection, and this idea of a wallet scriptlet. So basically, it's a small script you can write, like a shell script, or like a Python script, something that you can write that automates a wallet process. Now, you can do that with the Rust client. You can't currently do that with a Haskell client. A big priority in Q1 for the Daedalus team will be putting a terminal into Daedalus itself, and then allow you through that terminal to interact with the wallet layer, and giving you the ability to have an advanced user mode where you can manually construct transactions, do offline signing, do UTXO selection, these types of things, in addition to running your own scripts inside the system, and eventually coming up with a clever way of packaging them and deploying them so we can talk about automated wallets. This is just a really cool thing to do. A lot of power users want to do it for a variety of reasons, for forensics reasons, to other reasons, to exchanges wanting to run these types of things. And so it's a feature that we're going to start designing out and gradually rolling in. Another thing you guys are going to start seeing is we're going to start writing some content about what the delegation center is going to look like, what the delegation process is going to look like, and also the presentation of things like stake pools. This is a slightly controversial topic because just like if you're Google Play or iOS or any of these app stores, he who controls what you see first, just like a search engine, if what's on the first page is usually the page that wins out. If you're on the second page or the third page, or if you're in a less prominent area of the GUI, you have a significantly lower percentage chance of getting eyeballs, attention, and interaction. So it's very important that we have a discussion in the community about what is the optimal way of displaying the delegation pools that are available, and how those mechanics will work. So what we'll probably do is once the scamps are fully done, and that'll be in early January to mid-January for our first set of them, we'll start socializing that, and then we'll probably go to community groups like the Cardano Effect, for example, and do a whole presentation like we did with episode 8, talking about the 1.4 release and getting some community feedback on different ways we could potentially do this and eventually converge to a good design that we think is fair for people. But it is an important point to say that this is now delving from hardcore mathematics and protocol design into opinion and into what we think is fair. So this has to be socialized and go beyond just our best guess. So look for that as well. So terminals coming, that's coming. Now, we get asked a lot about ledger support. Now that we're on the new data layer, we're going to have Icarus style addresses, which are ED 215.29 BIP44 compliant, and Ledger does support that. And what we've done is we, through Emergo, have begun discussions with a firm called Vacuum Labs. They did a very serious analysis of where the current ledger code was at that was done by the Cardano Foundation's prior contractor, and they've come up with an upgrade plan to take that base and basically make it compatible with our system. And so what we're going to do is we're going to engage them, and they think around 5 or 6 weeks worth of engineering work is required starting in early January, and that work, once done, should give us the ability to easily interact with Ledger. And if that's the case, then Ledger support should come in short order. So the soonest you could expect it on the Daedalus side would be February, but we potentially might be able to get it out a little earlier on the Yoroi side. Yoroi is also working on Trezor support as well. So you'll notice that once Icarus style addresses are supported by Daedalus, there's going to be another transition where we'd like to get people from the old non-deterministic addresses to the new Icarus addresses, because you'll have significantly faster recovery time for wallet restoration. Furthermore, the address size is about half the size. So easier addresses to work with, faster recovery time, just overall better experience for people. Furthermore, those will be the addresses supported by the Ledger devices, not the old Daedalus style non-deterministic addresses. Furthermore, then the Icarus addresses and the Daedalus addresses will be interoperable with each other. So Yoroi and Daedalus should be able to restore from each other at some point. So we're still coordinating with Nico and Sebastian about that, but that's where we're at. I'd like, obviously, to wave a magic wand and have these things faster, but there was just a lot of bottlenecks that prevented us from getting there. One is we had to resurrect the project from bad product management from a different organization. 2, we had to be ready to integrate something like this, and 1.4 was really the milestone for it. It made no sense to attempt to get Ledger support with the old data layer and the old wallet, because that was a very poorly written piece of code that had a lot of problems with it. And resurrecting that code to a new system made a lot more sense than trying to make it work, but then have to throw it all away and rewrite it. So sorry it took so long, but now we're on good track. Vacuum Labs is a good company. They have a lot of wonderful people, and it's real exciting to see that. Now, another thing is that we're going to start building GUI scamps for the offline center for basically segregate your hot wallets from your cold wallets. So we already have paper wallets, and soon we'll have Ledger support. What that functionally means is now Daedalus needs to account for 2 different types of wallets in the system. Right now, we have a monolithic system where there's one type of wallet, and you just create as many different accounts as you want within that one wallet class. So each and every one of them is an HD wallet, but at some point, you're going to have now your paper wallet and your Ledger device and your regular hot wallet. Now, the reason why we need to segregate these things is that there's this concept of cold staking. where you have your ledger device or your paper wallet, and you want to be able to control the stake for the purposes of delegating and eventually voting on Cardano improvement proposals or treasury ballots. But you do not want to take the private keys and expose those private keys to a hot wallet. You don't want them living on disk, living on network. You want to keep them on paper or keep them in that hardware device so that they're safe and secure. So there needs to be a way from a GUI to see what your balance is on that device and have a process where you can import a transaction giving that stake key authorization, or import in memory only these credentials and then transfer them and give control of them to Daedalus, but keep the spending keys offline. So basically, we need to build a center for that, and that's in parallel something that the Daedalus team is working on. We've already started GUI discussions, and they'll converge probably about mid-January to February, and it's easy to do these things. It's just we need a few more things in Daedalus to make that happen. But the good news about Daedalus is that it uses a really easy to understand GUI approach. We use React Polymorph, and it's built on top of Chromium and Node because it's using the Electron system. So we're using a very traditional web-style model, and as a consequence, we can do very rapid prototyping, very rapid iteration when we're doing GUI scams, sometimes a matter of days to weeks. So converging to a design is actually quite straightforward. It takes a lot more time to actually build that functionality on the back end, but the new wallet layer is much more resilient, robust, and easier to extend than the old model. So we should be able to get new features out. So in summary, Shelley has three components: a social component, a testing component, and an upgrade component. Upgrade taking the existing system and gradually morphing it into the Shelley system. Testing meaning that we have to verify that our version of reality is correct, and we think it is, but we have to absolutely make sure it is, and we're getting close to being able to do that. And the social component meaning we have to build up on a large pool of stake pools, a large amount of stake pools. We have to get people used to the delegation center and get people comfortable with that presentation and how all these delegation mechanics are going to work. And basically just set a date once all these things are done. We've hit certain thresholds, and then once we flip the switch, there'll be gradual reduction of BFT nodes that control the system, epic by epic, down to basically a complete decentralization. So it won't be instantaneous, it'll be gradual epic by epic, and then we'll just wake up maybe 10 epics later, and suddenly the entire system's totally decentralized. So that's a little bit about Shelley. Ledger's coming. We now have a great third-party partner for that. Yoroi is evolving at a great rate. In fact, I think Sebastian and Nico are going to have some great announcements here in a little bit. And they're really doing a wonderful job of making Cardano easy to use. And that's really exciting. Now, as a final point, let's talk about usability. I'm really, really excited about the prospect of actually making Cardano a good user experience. You see, guys, the problem with our ecosystem has always been that people have entered into Cardano with unrealistic expectations. And those unrealistic expectations were that Cardano and Daedalus are consumer products that are completely polished and finished, like Windows 10 or your latest version of Mac OS. This is not true. When Cardano was released in 2017, it was a very early product, and it was a huge learning experience for our users and ourselves. And if you ever use beta software, if you ever use version 1 software of some completely new thing, using completely new techniques, the reality is you're going to have bugs, you're going to have frustrations, you're going to have unexpected crashes, you're going to have all kinds of boneheaded things that come up, and that's just a fact of life. So, you know, that I empathize and understand that people have had issues like connecting to network, or things are slower than they ought to be, or, you know, things take too much memory or disk space, but this is just growing pains. And what you'll notice is that over the course of this year, we have made massive improvements to the system. The network stack has gotten 3 to 4 times faster on average. Memory consumption for Daedalus has gone down by 75%, if not more. Disk storage has gone from multi-gigabytes to hundreds of megabytes to a megabyte or gigabyte or two. We've seen a massive improvement in UTXO selection, and now we have a system that will not fragment, whereas the old system did. And once we move to deterministic addresses, we'll have paths to enable very quick recoveries like Icarus did. Furthermore, we were able in a very short period of time to build a great user experience with Chrome and hand that off as a reference product to Infinito and to Emergo. And in both cases, they were able to get things that have now enabled thousands of Cardano users to be able to use our protocol comfortably with a pretty good user experience. So it is a beta product. We've been working real hard to make it better, and there are massive wins throughout this year that demonstrate that. And it's also very important to point out that we've not had massive or significant bugs, such that huge sums of money have been lost, such that the entire network went down for weeks at a time, such that the vast majority of the users, the client just doesn't work. And we also have had multi-platform support. Windows, Mac, and now Linux 1.4 is on Linux. So what we're going to do for 2019 is IOHK is now getting to the point where we feel it's worthwhile to have a dedicated product experience officer. And that person's role will be to start with the user experience and then work the way backward to exactly what we need to do to enhance our protocol and technology to massively improve certain things like startup time, improve usability, redo the UI and UX, these types of things. It wasn't quite reasonable, I'd say, in the first year because this was basically a big experiment and there was a huge amount of learning on our organization on how to do QA, help desk, how to get the release cycles where they needed to be, working with exchanges, working with enterprise users, working with everyday consumers. But now we have proper segregation. Now we have proper processes. We're in a position where such a product experience officer does make sense. So that role will be soon put into our HRQ, and it's something that throughout 2019 we're going to worry a lot about. Everything from the unique experiences of delegation to how we want to roll out multi-sig to how we go about improving basic things like speed, for example, and what trade-offs are we willing to make for that. For example, if you want to do a fast restoration under a deterministic HD wallet, if you have access to an Explorer, you can do a restoration at a very fast pace, less than a minute in some cases, as we've seen with Yoroi. But that does mean you do potentially have to trust some third party. If you don't trust anyone, the best you can hope for is a restoration in the 30-minute to an hour range, depending upon the speed of the PC and exactly how things are stored and so forth. So, you know, this is just the reality of software and the reality where we live. Another thing is not everybody needs to have a full client. When we first launched it, it made sense to build up a large node population of full nodes so that when the full peer-to-peer switches on and the full network switches on, we have a resilient backbone of full nodes. But at some point, we do need to see client segregation on the light client side as well as the mobile side. And that's really what 2019 is about. So we'll see a natural settling of some people preserving those nodes, still operating them, some people switching over to lighter experiences, and some people switching over cell phones. So it's been a productive year. We've certainly learned a lot. Just simply creating a lingua franca between business people, engineers, and scientists was a pretty Herculean task, but it was accomplished. And we have a lot of workshops coming, and we have a lot of things coming out, a lot of socialization coming out. We will make best effort to deliver in Q1 of 2019. And unless there's a significant delay, we'll see what happens. But it's always been a goal to try to get things out when they can, but also make sure that they come out with reasonable quality and they come out with a good user experience and they come out with a high probability of success. It's incredibly important to understand that when Shelley comes out, Cardano is basically on same footing with every other major cryptocurrency in the space, in that it is fully decentralized. It'll be 50 to 100 times more decentralized than Ethereum, Bitcoin, and EOS in terms of the control dynamics. That's a very big deal. And if you don't have the right social structures in place for that, it won't be successful. So that's a huge priority. Now that the foundation's back into the fold and they're operating again, as they wake up, it's something they're going to begin investing money into, and it's something we as an organization care a lot about, and our ecosystem cares a lot about. And I'm just really glad to see that what we're doing is being met in tandem with great work on the community development progress. So we'll see the Cardano Ambassador program running out soon. We'll make some sort of announcement about the Hub program, and the Cardano effect has been growing at a pretty great rate, and it'd be wonderful to see copycat podcasts in different languages, in particular Korean and Japanese, running. And I think over an arc of time that we can see these things stabilize and just become the norm in our ecosystem. So brief 30-minute update. Thank you guys all for listening, and it's been quite a bit of a ride. And Merry Christmas and Happy New Year, and I hope to see everybody soon in January. Cheers.